The message appeared on every screen in the Tactical Operations Center at 3:47 hours. 6 words, typed with trembling fingers from a bunker somewhere in the Zabel Mountain corridor. Tell them I tried. Then nothing. The communications officer stared at the blinking cursor, throat tight, knowing what silence meant in that part of the world. Outside, the Afghan night pressed against the reinforced windows like black water. Colonel Briggs stood motionless behind the console, calculating distances, fuel reserves, and the terrible math of abandoned men. The forward operating base was 70 kilometers from anything resembling help. 12 soldiers, surrounded, ammunition critically low, calling for fire support that couldn't reach them before dawn, and dawn was when the enemy would overrun their position completely. The satellite feed showed thermal signatures converging from 3 directions, slow and methodical, like wolves tightening a noose. Briggs reached for the radio, then stopped. Every available asset was committed elsewhere. The Apache gunships were refueling after a brutal engagement near Kandahar. The AC-130 had a cracked hydraulic line. Fast movers from Bagram were weathered in by a freak sandstorm that had rolled across the Hindu Kush like a biblical plague. He cycled through the air tasking order twice, hoping he'd missed something. He hadn't. The screen refreshed. Another message, kids are sleeping now. Tell my daughter about the stars. Briggs closed his eyes. 23 years of service, 3 wars, and he'd never felt this powerless. Then a voice crackled through the guard frequency, calm and almost casual, with the faint rasp of someone who'd been breathing cockpit air for too long. Lionheart, Maine. This is Reaper 11, 20 miles out, single ship, requesting immediate tasking. Briggs grabbed the microphone so fast it almost slipped from his palm. Reaper 11, negative, negative, we have no active. Who is this? A pause filled with engine noise. Captain Ashkir Rahan, sir, returning from a long-range interdiction. Heard the chatter. I've got 30 minutes of fuel and a full combat load. Briggs felt his heart accelerate. He pulled up the flight roster, scrolling fast. Rahan. The name triggered a memory he'd half forgotten, the pilot who'd been grounded for 3 months after a disciplinary review, the one they'd sent to babysit cargo runs because some general thought she was too aggressive. Reaper 11, you are not cleared for, sir. Her voice cut through, steady as iron. Those men are typing goodbyes. I can be overhead in 9 minutes. Briggs looked at the satellite feed. The thermal signatures were less than 400 meters from the bunker now. He thought about regulations, chain of command, and career-ending decisions. Then he thought about 12 soldiers writing final letters in the dark. Reaper 11, you are cleared hot. God help us both. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was never designed to be beautiful. It looked like something assembled in a hurry by engineers who'd forgotten aesthetics entirely, a titanium bathtub bolted to wings, built around a cannon so monstrous it could shred armored vehicles like aluminum foil. But in the cockpit, sliding through the Afghan night at 280 knots, Captain Ashkir Rahan thought it was the most honest aircraft ever made. No pretense, no elegance. Just physics and firepower and the stubborn refusal to quit. She banked southeast, watching the mountain ridges scroll past beneath her. The heads-up display painted the world in green monochrome, altitude and airspeed overlaid on the darkness. Her hands moved across the controls with the unconscious precision of someone who'd logged over 800 combat hours, most of them in places where enemy fire was a statistical certainty rather than a possibility. The radio hissed. Reaper 11, Lionheart, proceed direct checkpoint Valor. Friendlies are under effective fire from dismounted infantry, hillside positions, estimate 50+ hostiles. Danger close, authorization granted. She copied the coordinates into her nav system, already running the calculations. 50 hostiles meant this wasn't a probe or harassment. This was an annihilation attempt. They'd waited until every other asset was off station, then moved in for the kill. Smart, patient, and absolutely ruthless. She respected that even as she prepared to destroy it. Lionheart, Reaper, confirm I am cleared to engage all targets within 100 meters of friendlies. A hesitation. Reaper, that's extremely close. Ashkir smiled without humor. Sir, that's the job. Another pause, longer. "You're cleared, they're counting on you." She pushed the throttles forward and dove toward the mountains. The bunker smelled like copper and cordite, and the particular staleness of men who'd been fighting for 16 hours without rest. Staff Sergeant Cade Merrick pressed his shoulders against the sandbags and reloaded his rifle for the fourth time, hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Around him, 11 other soldiers did the same, their faces streaked with dust and sweat, eyes hollow. They'd held this position since yesterday afternoon, turning back 3 assaults through sheer firepower and desperation. But ammunition was nearly gone. Medical supplies were exhausted, and the enemy knew it. Corporal Voss crouched beside the radio, whispering coordinates into the handset like a prayer. "Any update?" Merrick asked. Voss shook his head. "They said help is coming, single ship." "Single ship." Private Chen, no relation to anyone famous, just a rifleman from Sacramento with a talent for bad jokes, laughed bitterly. "One plane. We're getting overrun by 50 fighters and they're sending one plane." Merrick didn't answer. He was listening to the sounds outside, boots scraping on rock, the metallic click of weapons being charged, voices speaking in Pashto, coordinating the final push. They were methodical about it, professional. These weren't poorly trained insurgents. These were soldiers. "Sarge," Voss's voice cracked, "if we don't make it, we'll make it." Merrick said it with conviction he didn't feel. Outside, the enemy moved closer. Merrick could hear them breathing. Then, distant but unmistakable, a sound like ripping canvas echoed across the valley. The entire hillside erupted in fire. Ashkir came in from the north, wings level, altitude 300 feet, the GAU-8 Avenger cannon spooling up with a sound that had terrified ground forces for 4 decades. She toggled the targeting pod, painting the hillside with infrared, and what she saw made her jaw tighten. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly, dug into crevices and behind boulders, nearly invisible, arranged in overlapping fields of fire that would have shredded the bunker within minutes. But they'd made one mistake. They'd assumed air support wouldn't come. She squeezed the trigger. The cannon fired at 65 rounds per second, each depleted uranium projectile traveling at over 3,400 feet per second, the recoil so violent it actually slowed the aircraft. Tracers arced downward like red lightning, and where they touched the earth, men and rock and weapons disintegrated. She walked the fire across the hillside in precise, controlled bursts, methodical as a surgeon, devastating as a natural disaster. The enemy scattered, abandoning positions, running for cover that didn't exist. She banked hard, pulled up, rolled inverted to keep visual contact, and came around for another pass. Reaper 1-1, Lionheart, good hits, good hits. Friendlies are reporting enemy forces withdrawing. She didn't respond immediately. She was already lining up her second gun run, watching thermal signatures fleeing down the mountain and feeling something cold and focused settle into her chest. They'd tried to kill 12 men who couldn't fight back. Now she was going to teach them why that was a mistake. The A-10 screamed down again, cannon blazing, and the night turned to fire. Inside the bunker, the soldiers stared at each other in stunned silence. The incoming fire had stopped. The pressure that had been crushing them for 16 hours suddenly lifted, replaced by the distant thunder of a cannon and the shriek of a jet engine echoing through the valley. Merrick crawled to the firing port and looked out. The hillside was burning. Figures were running, silhouetted against flames, and as he watched, another burst of cannon fire tore through them with surgical precision. "Holy!" Chen whispered. "Who is that?" Voss had the radio pressed to his ear, listening. "Call sign Reaper 1-1. Single A-10. One pilot." "One pilot is doing that." Merrick watched another gun run, the tracers so dense they looked like a solid beam of light. The A-10 maneuvered like something possessed, rolling and diving and pulling up at angles that seemed physically impossible, staying low, staying aggressive, giving the enemy no time to regroup or return fire. It was the most ferocious display of airmanship he'd ever witnessed. "Get me a line to that pilot," Merrick said. Voss worked the radio, and after a moment a voice came through, female, calm, slightly breathless. "Ground element, Reaper 1-1, give me an assessment." Merrick keyed the mic. "Reaper, this is Sergeant Merrick. You just saved 12 lives. I don't know how to thank you." A pause. "Stay alive, Sergeant, that's thanks enough. I'm going to keep circling until extract arrives." Anyone moves toward your position, I'll handle it. Copy that, Reaper. What's your name? Another pause longer. Captain Rehan, Ashkir Rehan. Merrick smiled for the first time in hours. Captain Rehan, when we get back, first round is on me. I'll hold you to that. Reaper 1-1 out. Ashkir pulled the A-10 into a wide orbit 2,000 feet above the valley and allowed herself one long breath. Her hands were steady on the stick, but her heart was hammering. Below, the fires were dying down. Thermal imagery showed scattered signatures retreating into the mountains, disorganized, broken. The bunker was secure. She checked her fuel gauge. 12 minutes remaining, just enough to stay on station until the QRF arrived. The radio crackled. Reaper 1-1, Lionheart, outstanding work. Relief forces inbound, ETA 20 minutes. Copy, Lionheart, I'll maintain overwatch. Reaper, Colonel Briggs here. That was some of the finest close air support I've ever seen. Where did you learn to fly like that? She smiled faintly. Helmand Province, sir, 2019, before they decided I was too much trouble. A long silence. Well, remind me to send a thank you note to whoever grounded you. You just proved them wrong. She didn't respond to that. She banked the A-10 gently, watching the valley, thinking about the years since Helmand, the inquiry, the suspension, the whispers that she was reckless, unstable, unsuitable for combat operations. They'd assigned her to cargo escort duty, a punishment disguised as reassignment, and she'd flown those missions without complaint, waiting for a moment like this. A moment to prove that aggression wasn't recklessness when it was applied with precision. That refusing to quit wasn't instability, it was exactly what the job required. The fuel gauge ticked down. 10 minutes. Below, headlights appeared on the dirt road, the QRF rolling hard toward the bunker. Ashkir watched until they arrived, until soldiers dismounted and secured the perimeter, until she was absolutely certain no threat remained. Then she turned northwest, toward Bagram, and started the long flight home. She brought the A-10 in just after dawn, the sky turning from black to deep blue, the Hindu Kush peaks catching the first gold light. The base was waking up, aircraft taxiing, ground crews hustling across the flight line, the smell of jet fuel and dust heavy in the air. Ashkir taxied to her parking spot, shut down the engines, and sat in the silence for a moment, forehead resting against the canopy frame. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up. She climbed down the ladder slowly, legs stiff, and found Colonel Briggs waiting on the tarmac. He didn't salute. He just looked at her, expression unreadable, and then held out his hand. She shook it. Captain Rehan, he said quietly, you just became a legend. She shrugged. Just doing the job, sir. No, his grip tightened slightly. You did more than the job. You did something extraordinary. Those men are alive because you refused to accept that they were expendable. She met his eyes. No one's expendable, sir. He nodded slowly. No, they're not. He released her hand. Get some rest. We'll debrief at 1400 hours. And Captain, sir, welcome back to the fight. She smiled, a real smile this time, tired but genuine. Thank you, sir. She walked toward the ready room, feeling the sun on her face, hearing the morning sounds of the base, and for the first time in 3 months she felt like herself again. A pilot, a warrior, someone who mattered. The story should have ended there. In a cleaner world, that would have been the perfect conclusion. Pilot redeems herself, saves the day, gets welcomed back. But combat doesn't follow narrative arcs. It follows chaos. 2 weeks later, Ashkir was airborne again, this time as part of a 4-ship package supporting a major operation in Kunar province. The mission brief was straightforward. Provide close air support for a battalion-sized clearing operation in a valley known to be a Taliban stronghold. Intelligence estimated moderate resistance. Intelligence was wrong. The ground element hit an ambush 15 minutes into the operation, heavy machine gun fire from fortified positions, RPGs, and what sounded like coordinated mortar strikes. The radio filled with frantic calls for air support, overlapping voices, grid coordinates shouted over gunfire. Ashkir's flight lead, a major named Cortez, took the first gun run. Clean, professional, textbook execution. He suppressed one position, then pulled up and banked east. Reaper 1-2, you're cleared hot on the western tree line, he transmitted. Ashkir flying as number 2 rolled in, acquiring the target. But as she approached firing range, something caught her eye. Movement low and fast, barely visible against the terrain. She hesitated, finger on the trigger. Reaper 1-2, say status, Cortez's voice sharp. She stared at the target. The movement resolved into shapes, small shapes. Lead Reaper 1-2, I have possible civilians in the target area. Request confirmation. Negative Reaper 1-2, intelligence confirms area is clear. Engage. But she could see them now, 3 figures, maybe 4, running from a structure near the tree line, too small to be adults. She pulled off, aborting the run. Lead, I cannot confirm hostile, aborting. A long silence. Then, Reaper 1-2, you are ordered to engage. She climbed, circling. Lead, I need visual confirmation. I'm not firing blind. The radio exploded with chatter. Cortez demanding she engage immediately. The ground controller screaming for fire on the western tree line. Another pilot asking what the delay was. And underneath it all, the sound of men dying. Ashkir banked hard, bringing the targeting pod to bear on the tree line. She zoomed in, cranked the resolution to maximum, and studied the imagery with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. Their muzzle flashes, definitely hostile fire. But the figures she'd seen were still moving, still near the structure, and now she could see they were definitely children. 3 of them, maybe 8 or 9 years old, running toward a ditch. Lead Reaper 1-2, I have visual on 3 juvenile civilians, danger close to target area. Recommend we wait for them to clear. Cortez's voice was ice. Reaper 1-2, friendlies are taking effective fire. Those are enemy combatants using cover. Engage now or I will report your refusal. She felt her jaw tight. She'd been here before, this exact moment 3 months ago in Helmand, when she'd refused an order she knew was wrong and paid the price with her career. She could feel the weight of that decision even now, the months of shame and isolation, the looks from other pilots, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. If she refused again, it was over. They'd ground her permanently. She'd never fly combat again. The children reached the ditch and dove in, disappearing from view. The tree line erupted with more muzzle flashes. Men were dying. She made her decision. Reaper 1-2 is in hot. She rolled inverted, pulled the nose down, and lined up the tree line. The children were in the ditch. They'd stay there. She'd make sure of it. She fired. The GAU-8 roared, depleted uranium projectiles shredding the tree line, and the hostile fire stopped instantly. She pulled up, rolled level, and checked the targeting pod. The ditch was intact. No secondary explosions, no thermal signatures from it. The children were alive. Good hits, the ground controller called. Enemy fire has ceased, proceeding with advance. Ashkir exhaled slowly, the tension draining from her shoulders. She'd threaded the needle. Stopped the enemy, protected the children, followed orders. She'd done everything right. Reaper 1-2, lead. Good shooting, return to holding pattern. Copy, lead. She climbed to altitude and took her place in the orbit, watching the ground element advance through the valley. The operation continued without further incident. 2 hours later, they landed back at Bagram. Ashkir shut down, climbed out, and walked toward the debrief. She felt good. Tired, but good. She'd made the right call. Then she saw Cortez's face. He was standing with 2 other officers outside the operations building, and all 3 of them stopped talking when she approached. Cortez looked at her with something between disappointment and anger. Captain Wren, a word. They walked to a quiet corner of the flight line. Cortez crossed his arms. You refused a direct order. Sir, I had civilians in the target. You hesitated in combat while friendlies were taking fire. I eliminated the threat without civilian casualties. That's the job. The job, Cortez said quietly, is following orders, not freelancing, not playing hero. She stared at him. Those were children. You don't know that, you guessed. I saw them. Through a targeting pod at altitude under stress. You made an assumption that could have gotten men killed. She felt anger rising in her chest. I made the right call. That's not your decision to make, Captain. He looked at her for a long moment. You're a gifted pilot, maybe one of the best I've seen. But you don't trust the system. You don't trust your commanders, and that makes you dangerous. Sir, you're grounded, effective immediately. Report to the ops officer for reassignment. He turned and walked away. The second grounding was worse than the first. The first time there had been ambiguity. Maybe she'd been wrong, maybe she'd overreacted, maybe the inquiry was justified. This time, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd been right. And it didn't matter. They reassigned her to training flights, babysitting new pilots through basic maneuvers over empty desert. She flew the same patterns day after day, teaching eager young aviators how to land, how to navigate, how to communicate. She smiled and nodded and gave feedback, and every night she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was it, if her combat career was actually over. Word spread quickly. The other pilots avoided her, not out of malice but out of self-preservation. No one wanted to be associated with the pilot who'd been grounded twice. In the dining facility, conversation stopped when she approached. In the ready room, she sat alone. She became a ghost, present but invisible, technically part of the squadron but fundamentally isolated. 3 weeks passed, then 4, she stopped counting. And then on a Tuesday morning in late spring the alarm sounded. Not a drill, a real alert. Massive enemy offensive, multiple coalition bases under simultaneous attack, every available asset being scrambled. Ashkir was in the ready room when the operations officer burst through the door. Everyone airborne now. We need every plane in the air. The room erupted into motion. Pilots grabbed helmets and gear, sprinting toward the flight line. Ashkir stood up and the operations officer looked at her. "That includes you, Captain. You're cleared to fly." She didn't waste time with questions. She ran. Within 20 minutes she was airborne, part of a stream of aircraft launching from Bagram A-10s, F-16s. Apache, everything that could carry weapons. The radios were chaos, multiple frequencies overlapping, calls for support coming from 6 different locations simultaneously. The Taliban had chosen their moment well, hitting multiple bases at once, overwhelming the coalition's ability to respond everywhere. Ashkir flew southeast toward FOB Chapman, which was reporting the heaviest contact. The intelligence officer had briefed them, quickly estimated 200 insurgents, organized assault, mortars and heavy weapons, the base's outer defenses already breached. They needed air support immediately. She arrived overhead to find the base obscured by smoke. Tracer fire crisscrossed the perimeter in bright arcs. Explosions blossomed in the compound, mortars impacting with mathematical precision. This wasn't a raid. This was an attempt to overrun the entire base. "Any Reaper Chapman actual, we need immediate fire on the northern perimeter. Enemy forces are inside the wire." She checked her combat load. "Full complement of ammunition, plenty of fuel." "Chapman, Reaper 1-1, I'm overhead. Marking your position, stand by." She dove, dropping altitude rapidly, and activated her targeting systems. The situation was worse than she'd thought. Enemy fighters had penetrated the outer defenses and were advancing through the compound in coordinated teams. They were using the base's own structures for cover, moving tactically, suppressing defenders with disciplined fire. These weren't amateurs. She selected her cannon and began the most difficult close air support mission of her career. She had to engage enemy forces inside a friendly base, amid structures filled with coalition soldiers, with no margin for error. One mistake and she'd kill her own people. She rolled in. The first gun run was pure precision. She walked cannon fire along the northern perimeter, hitting insurgents advancing through the vehicle depot, careful to angle her shots to minimize ricochet. The depleted uranium rounds punched through vehicles and concrete barriers, tearing apart the enemy assault team. She pulled up, rolled, and immediately reacquired. "Chapman, Reaper, northern team is suppressed. Where do you need me?" "Reaper, Chapman, eastern side, they're trying to flank through the maintenance hangar." She banked hard, acquired the hangar in her targeting pod, and saw the problem immediately. A dozen fighters moving through the structure, using machinery and storage crates for cover. Firing through the hangar would endanger friendlies on the other side. She couldn't use the cannon. She switched to rockets. The Hydra 70s were less precise than the gun, but with careful aim, she could collapse part of the hangar roof, burying the insurgents without penetrating all the way through. She lined up the shot, compensated for wind, and fired. 2 rockets streaked downward, impacting the roof supports with perfect accuracy. The structure collapsed inward, steel beams and concrete crushing the enemy position. Good hit, eastern approach is clear." She climbed back to altitude, scanning for new threats. The battle was turning. With air support overhead, the defenders were rallying, pushing back, retaking lost positions. But the enemy wasn't retreating. They were regrouping, consolidating around the base's fuel depot, the most valuable target in the compound. If they destroyed it, Chapman would be combat ineffective for weeks. "Reaper, Chapman, they're massing near the fuel farm. If they hit those tanks, I see them." She did. 20, maybe 30 fighters gathering in the open area near the massive fuel storage tanks. It was suicide to group that tightly under air attack, unless they thought she wouldn't fire, wouldn't risk igniting the fuel. She armed her remaining rockets and rolled in. Chapman's commanding officer watched from the command bunker, binoculars pressed to his face, as the A-10 dove toward the fuel depot. "Is she insane?" someone whispered. "She's going to hit the tanks." But Ashkir had already calculated the angles. The fuel tanks were massive, reinforced structures designed to withstand indirect fire. Her rockets would strike the ground in front of them, the fragmentation pattern directed away from the tanks, killing the insurgents while leaving the fuel intact. It was possible, barely. She fired 3 rockets in rapid sequence, each one calibrated to impact 5 meters in front of the tank line. They streaked downward, trailing smoke, and for one frozen moment everyone at Chapman held their breath. The rockets impacted simultaneously. The insurgent group disintegrated in a massive explosion, but the fuel tanks remained intact, untouched, exactly as she'd planned. "Jesus Christ," Chapman's XO whispered. She threaded the needle. The insurgent assault broke completely. The remaining fighters retreated, abandoning their positions, fleeing back into the mountains under withering fire from the base defenders. Within 15 minutes, the battle was over. "Reaper 1-1, Chapman actual, that was. I don't have words. You saved this base." Ashkir pulled the A-10 into a gentle orbit, adrenaline still singing through her veins. "Happy to help, Chapman. Reaper 1-1 is returning to base." She turned northwest toward Bagram, and for the second time in her career she'd done something impossible. But this time she knew it wouldn't be enough. They'd grounded her twice already. Exceptional performance didn't erase disobedience. She'd saved Chapman, but she'd probably just flown her last combat mission. The thought should have hurt. Instead, she felt strangely at peace. She'd done what she was meant to do. Anything else was just politics. The debrief was different this time. They held it in the main briefing room, with 40 people crammed inside: pilots, intelligence officers, ground commanders, even a 2-star general who'd flown in from Kabul. Ashkir sat at the front table, still wearing her flight suit, and watched them file in with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed awe. Colonel Briggs stood at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to discuss the events at FOB Chapman this morning. Captain Wren, walk us through your engagement." She did, methodically explaining each decision, each weapon selection, each calculated risk. When she described the final rocket strike near the fuel depot, the room went completely silent. When she finished, Briggs looked at her for a long moment. "Captain, you engaged enemy forces inside a friendly base, near fuel storage, with no forward air controller, making split-second decisions that could have resulted in catastrophic friendly fire." He paused. "And you executed flawlessly. Chapman's commander estimates you saved over 200 lives today." She didn't respond. She wasn't sure if it was a compliment or an indictment. The general stood up. "Captain Wren, I've reviewed your record: 2 groundings, multiple disciplinary actions, a pattern of refusing orders." He walked toward her. "And today, you conducted one of the most remarkable close air support missions I've seen in 30 years of service." He stopped in front of her. "So I have a question. Why do you keep refusing orders?" She met his eyes. "Sir, I don't refuse orders. I refuse bad orders. Orders that would kill civilians. Orders that ignore ground truth. I will follow any order that makes tactical sense, but I won't kill innocent people because someone on the radio is scared or rushed or operating off bad intelligence." The room was silent. The general stared at her. Then slowly he nodded. "You know what the problem is, Captain. You're right. And that terrifies people." He turned to address the room. "Effective immediately, Captain Wren is restored to full combat status. Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with me personally." He looked back at her. "Don't make me regret this, Captain," she smiled. "No, sir, I won't." The return to flight status changed nothing and everything simultaneously. She flew the same missions, faced the same dangers, made the same split-second decisions. But now, other pilots started listening when she talked, started asking questions, started treating her not as a problem but as someone who'd proven something important, that you could be aggressive and precise, bold and careful, that the two weren't contradictory. 6 months after Chapman, she was flying night-close air support in Helmand Province when her right engine exploded. No warning, just a catastrophic mechanical failure that turned a functional turbofan into a fireball. Alarms screamed in the cockpit. The A-10 lurched sideways, aerodynamics suddenly asymmetrical, trying to roll inverted. She fought the controls, killed the right engine, feathered the propeller, and ran through the emergency procedures with mechanical calm even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The aircraft stabilized. Barely. She was 70 miles from Bagram, flying on one engine over hostile territory at night. The smart move was to eject. The aircraft was insured. She wasn't worth the risk. But below her, a marine company was pinned down, taking heavy fire, waiting for her to provide cover while they extracted casualties. She checked her fuel, her altitude, her single remaining engine's temperature gauge. Then she keyed the radio. Lionheart, Reaper 11, I've lost my right engine, declaring emergency. Reaper, Lionheart, copy emergency. What are your intentions? She looked down at the Marines, visible on her targeting pod, dragging wounded men toward their vehicles under fire. Lionheart, I'm staying on station. Marines need me. Reaper, negative, you need to RTB immediately. You're Lionheart. Her voice was quiet but absolute. I'm not leaving. Silence. Then, copy Reaper. We'll have emergency services standing by. She rolled the crippled A-10 back into the fight. Flying on one engine was like dancing with a partner who kept trying to throw her off a cliff. Every maneuver required double the effort, triple the concentration. The aircraft wanted to spiral, wanted to stall, wanted to betray her. But she'd spent 800 hours in this cockpit, and she knew every quirk, every limitation, every impossible thing it could do if you asked correctly. She made 3 more gun runs, each one slower and more precarious than the last, walking cannon fire across enemy positions while the Marines broke contact and moved toward their extract point. Her left hand stayed locked on the throttle, babying the single engine, feeling every vibration, listening for any sign it might fail too. If it did, she was dead. No altitude for ejection, no time for rescue, just physics and dirt. Reaper, ground element, all casualties are loaded. We're moving to extract point. Copy, I'll stay overhead until you're clear. Reaper, you need to get yourself home. I'll leave when you leave, Marine, not before. She held the orbit, circling at minimum safe altitude, watching their vehicles navigate the rough terrain toward the landing zone. 10 minutes. 15. The engine temperature was climbing, edging toward the red line. 20 minutes. The helicopters arrived, massive Chinooks dropping into the LZ, and the Marines loaded aboard with practiced efficiency. 30 seconds later, they were airborne, climbing hard toward safety. Reaper, ground element is clear. Thank you. Seriously, thank you. Glad I could help. Reaper 11 is RTB. She turned northwest, alone in the darkness, and began the longest flight of her life. The engine held, barely. She coaxed the A-10 across 70 miles of Afghan mountains, talking to it, pleading with it, promising it maintenance and respect, and anything else it wanted if it would just keep running for another 30 minutes. At 28 minutes, she saw the lights of Bagram. At 29 minutes, she entered the landing pattern. At 30 minutes exactly, the left engine seized. She was at 400 feet, half a mile from the runway, with no power and no options. She could eject. The altitude was marginal but possible. Or she could try to glide a brick with wings onto a runway in the dark. She pushed the nose down and aimed for the runway. The A-10 fell more than flew, trading altitude for airspeed, the ground rushing up with terrible inevitability. Ashker held the stick with both hands, making microscopic adjustments, feeling the aircraft respond with sluggish reluctance. She had one chance. No power meant no go-around, no second attempt. She'd land on this pass or she'd crash. The runway lights stretched ahead like a pathway to salvation. She was too high. She deployed speed brakes, felt the aircraft decelerate, dropped faster. Still too high. The runway threshold passed beneath her. She was going to overshoot. She forced the nose down, aggressive, dangerous, bleeding off altitude in a controlled fall that would have failed any flight school evaluation, but was the only option she had left. The main gear touched down halfway down the runway, hard, bouncing once, then settling. She stood on the brakes, felt them grab, felt the aircraft shudder as momentum fought physics. The end of the runway approached with terrifying speed. She was going to run out of concrete. At the last possible moment, the A-10 stopped. She sat in the cockpit, hands still gripping the stick, and allowed herself one shaking breath. Then she shut down the remaining systems, opened the canopy, and climbed down. Colonel Briggs was waiting on the taxiway, along with half the squadron and every emergency vehicle on base. He walked toward her slowly, expression unreadable. When he reached her, he said simply, "Captain Rand. Do you have any idea how insane that was?" She smiled weakly. "Yes, sir, I do. You could have ejected. Marines were still in the air, sir. If I'd ejected over the base, I might have hit one of their helicopters." He stared at her. "You stayed airborne on one engine for 30 minutes and then landed a dead aircraft because you were worried about helicopter traffic." "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he started laughing, a deep, genuine laugh that spread through the assembled crowd until half the squadron was laughing too. "Captain Rand," Briggs said, "you are either the bravest pilot I've ever met or the craziest. Possibly both.